So
okay,
actually,
I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran.
You're a senator who's calling for the overthrow of the government.
You're the one who
don't know anything about the country.
No, you don't know anything about the country. You're the one who claims they're not trying to murder Donald Trump.
Fiery exchange on Tucker Carlson's program recently as he goes at it with Ted Cruz over regime change in Iran, with Ted Cruz promoting the idea of regime change there despite all the disastrous regime changes of the past. This is fiery, probably the most contentious interview I've ever seen Tucker have. So let's watch and let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I just want to end by asking you specifically about what's going to happen next in Iran and what should happen next. So you've called for regime change. You said you don't favor the U.S. military participating in any kind of regime change. You said you don't think, and bless you for saying this, that the U.S. military should try and turn it into Belgium.
Yeah.
Thank God. But there is a third option where it turns into Syria, where it's this open wound and it causes massive migration and further destroys Europe, as Syria has.
Yeah.
And that's a huge cost, and where lots of people die and religious minorities get murdered in Syria again. Are you worried about that?
Sure. And listen, that lots of bad things can happen. But going back to what we talked about, the principle of defending America, I agree with President Trump that Iran with a nuclear weapon is an unacceptable risk to America, and we need to stop it. I agree with President Trump, and I'll make a point.
But he's not for regime change.
He's not. So he and I disagree. Yeah, look, I think he thinks it would be better. He has not said he's for it. And you know what? Look, it is consequential when the President of the United States says, I'm for regime change. So I understand why he hasn't.
Yeah, so listen to this. He's already spouting the typical neocon propaganda regarding Iran's nuclear weapon acquisition, the same weapon that Tulsi Gabbard says is they have not acquired. There's no evidence they're close to acquiring it, and that there's no evidence they've even restarted their program since it was dismantled in 2003. This is the handpicked director of national intelligence that I believe Ted Cruz voted for and supported it, by the way. But he's still, despite those things, and despite the fact that the CIA has every incentive to drum up war propaganda, they aren't in this case, and he's still buying the war propaganda despite that. Because he supports Israel to the bitter end, he's highly supported by AIPAC, and this is Netanyahu's war. It's a regime change operation they've wanted forever, and he's starting down the propaganda path already.
What he has said is he's drawn a red line and said, Iran will not have a nuclear weapon, and the only acceptable outcome is complete dismantlement. So they have centrifuges. They're enriching uranium right now. They're trying to develop a nuclear weapon. He said they must have complete dismantlement. I led 52 senators, Republican senators, in a letter where we said we agree with President Trump. That's the red line, complete dismantlement. I agree with President Trump. I agree with him supporting Israel, taking out Iran's military leadership, taking out their nuclear capability. And I'll point out, look, if you look the first term, I am hard-pressed to think of a single foreign policy decision Donald Trump made the first term that I disagree with. And that's not...
Of course. He has no problem with getting deeper involved in the proxy war in Yemen on behalf of the Saudis, that, decade-long blockade. It's been over a decade now, where Trump had an opportunity to end that war. A bill came across his desk. He used one of his sole presidential vetoes to keep the U.S. involved there, ramping up the execution of expanded presence in Syria, ramping up the bombing in Afghanistan. Ted Cruz won't say this because the term has taken such a derisive angle, but he's a neocon. He supports all of these wars. He even supported the proxy war in Ukraine to the teeth. He repeats CNN propaganda about Putin and his aspirations to reconstitute the Soviet Union. So, of course, he doesn't have a problem with any military endeavor.
Not entirely accidental, because I spent a lot of time the first term in the Oval Office with him. And what happened in the first term often is you would have in the administration, you had interventionists in the administration, you had isolationists. And
there were no isolationists in the first term cabinet. All of them, at least, were pro-Israeli Zionists that wanted to get involved at least in what Israel wanted to do. The John Boltons of the world were not a non-interventionist, Despite what you may have heard, Mike Pompeo was not either. So this is crap. He's basically saying anyone to the left of Bill Kristol, in terms of what his conception of the left is, or anyone more non-interventionist than Bill Kristol, is an isolationist. It's complete bogus. I wish there were what he calls isolationists in Trump's first cabinet. Of course, most isolationists don't exist, because you would have to say, well, we're going to cut off all trade with this country too, and all diplomacy. And basically no one that opposes the war does that. They're non-interventionists like Ron Paul. So that's just used as a derisive term. No one really claims it, and I'm not saying that you can't use it because no one claims it, but what real isolationism would mean would be stopping trade and diplomacy. Most anti-war dissidents don't want to do that.
They disagree. They would fight within the administration. And often what it would give is an opportunity for me to come in and say, hey, there's a middle path here that President Trump agreed with frequently. And it's worth noting, in the first term, he most assuredly was not an isolationist. Look, he took out General Soleimani,
True.
Which I emphatically agree with. And in fact, I introduced a resolution that we voted on the Senate floor commending him for taking out General Soleimani, who was the leader of the IRGC and who was responsible for killing over 600 American servicemen and women. When Trump came in, ISIS had a caliphate that had grown up under Obama that was about the size of the state of Indiana. And Trump came in and utterly decimated them. He killed the terrorists, took away their caliphate, and defeated them. And he also took out Baghdadi, the head of ISIS. I mean, those are not the actions of an isolationist, but at the same time,
I don't even know what isolation is. It's just a slur designed to control. I mean, I've never met an isolationist. I don't even know what that means.
Okay, Rand Paul is my colleague. Rand is an isolationist.
Okay,
and Tucker.
He's not. He's a non-interventionist. He wants free trade with these countries that he doesn't want to go to war with. He wants open diplomacy. That's nonsense. And they'll say, well, there's no such thing as a neocon then. Well, no, people self-described as neocon and formulated an entire school of foreign policy over neoconservatism. And they were Irving Kristol and Podhoretz. So yeah, they actually did exist. They're the Paul Wolfowitzes of the world and Richard Pearl.
You've become one, and I don't mean it as a slur.
Of course I've not. I'm worried about turning this mess in Iran into a much larger mess. That's the concern.
And by the way, that's a reasonable worry. Look,
I know it's reasonable. And I know you're ready to call me all these names for asking, you're just asking questions. Yes, I am. So here's my question to you. If the Ayatollah is killed in Iran, and he very well
could if there's a war.
I have just read in the paper this morning that Israel tried to take him out twice and Trump told them not to.
I have read that. I don't have independent confirmation one way or the other.
Do you think that they should take him out?
So I actually talked about it. As you know, I do a podcast every week, Verdict with Ted Cruz, and I actually talked about it in the latest podcast. And I said, look, I've seen the reporting that says that Trump asked them not to take out the Ayatollah. And what I said in the podcast is I think it's reasonable for them to decide not to try to take him out. What they've done is targeted just about the entire top level of the military, the people that actually conduct the war.
Along with the residents that lived in the respective compounds of that top brass and died in a fruitless and provocative and aggressive, unprovoked strike on Israel residential district. Yeah, they did.
I can see an argument that taking out both the head of
I should say Iranian residential district
state and a religious leader could make him a martyr and could cause more problems than it's worth. And by the way, if you take out the Ayatollah, I don't know if the next guy isn't just as bad. And so
we found that out from 1953 to 1979, didn't we? We being the CIA overthrew Mossadegh, installed Shah Pahlavi. Then he was overthrown by the Ayatollahs that now reign supreme there by 79. So yeah, we found out what happens when you do arrange regime change in Iran. It's not pretty. It's not likely to be pretty again.
What happens to the country?
I don't know, but you mentioned before, and I want to go back to this. You said something like, you, like most other politicians, are engaged in moral terms. And let me be clear, I am talking about national interest. I am talking about protecting America. So there are bad guys on planet Earth that I don't think we should take out, even though they're bad guys.
Good.
I'll call them bad guys.
Do you? I would like to hear his list, because if he listed them, that might preclude him from supporting those in the future. So I want to hear your list, Ted. I don't think that list is that long. It's not the kind of grocery list that my wife creates, that's for sure.
But I'm not willing to use U.S. military force to take them out. In this instance, what Israel is doing is taking out their capacity to build nuclear weapons. Why? Because they judge the risk is too high if they got nuclear weapons.
I understand that. I mean, I understand that. I think it's in progress. I think it'll probably be achieved, probably with U.S. military support. Who knows? But the president said he's for that.
And by the way, where the military support is most needed is Fordow, which is it's a bunker that's built under a mountain.
Right.
And Israel's taken out most of the rest, like Natanz, which is their big enrichment site. They bombed the hell out of it. Fordow was deliberately built deep into a mountain so that Israel couldn't take it out. And there's an active discussion because the U.S. has bunker buster bombs that are big enough to take out Fordow.
30,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Israel doesn't. So the one military piece
nor the aircraft to fly them.
Correct. Right.
But here's, I guess, what bothers me is that I said 2 weeks ago, the real goal here is regime change in Iran. It's not.
I don't think that's Trump's goal.
It's your goal. It's Israel's goal. I'm not attacking anyone. I'm just saying it's important to be honest and not lie and not attack people for telling the truth.
It's long been Netanyahu's goal. He said he wants the Libya model to apply there, which was a regime change operation that Israel supported, the U.S. partook in as part of a NATO alliance. We know that plans were laid out for Iranian regime change going back at least as far as 1996, because Wesley Clark went into the Pentagon 10 days after 9/11 and saw a classified memo that said 7 countries, one of which was Iran, was being planned to be overthrown for 5 years. So they've long wanted this to be the plan. This has been long-lasting U.S. policy driving to this point, and antagonism all around toward Iran from the jump.
So I believe I've been assiduously honest in this, but words matter. You said the real goal here is regime change, and it's your goal. And I want to be clear.
Well, you said it was your goal.
I want to be clear because words matter. Do I support regime change, and would I like a government that doesn't hate America and isn't trying to kill us in Iran? Yes, that's a good outcome. Is that the objective of these military strikes? I don't think necessarily. I don't know if it's Israel's. It's not my objective. My objective is taking out.
U.S. If Israel decides we're going to decapitate the government and try to foment an uprising against it, should the United States participate in that operation in any way?
Look, I have not called for killing the Ayatollah. And there is nations in war generally refrain from attacking and killing heads of state. Now, the Ayatollah doesn't. He's trying to kill Trump. We talked about that.
That's bogus CIA propaganda with no backing. Whenever they throw this out, and Republicans have been throwing this out for off and on over the last 6 months going into the election cycle last year, they said, well, Trump's being targeted for assassination by Iran, and then they never cite any specifics that show that. They just say, trust us, we've been briefed, it's part of congressional testimony, but trust us. It just so happens that that country that's supposedly trying to assassinate Trump is the one country left on that 7-country list that the U.S. was planning to overthrow. All other 6 have happened. It's just a sheer coincidence, right?
But we shouldn't punish him for it.
Look, there has been a long-standing nations in war have refrained from killing heads of state. I have not publicly called for killing the Ayatollah. What I've called for is doing whatever is necessary to stop him from getting nuclear weapons. In the first Trump term, what that meant was maximum pressure. So in the first Trump term, I spent a lot of time urging the president to withdraw from the disastrous Iranian nuclear deal that Obama had.
Probably the only good foreign policy solution Obama ever provided us. It was a foreign policy disastrous administration, but that was the one thing that normalized relations with Iran to an extent and took off the table the prospect of regime change. And in a way, since Trump ripped it up in his first term, that's the reason why regime change is on the table again. That's probably why the timing of the strike happened when it did, because it squashed any hope of negotiations with Iran. I think that the writing was on the wall that the U.S. delegation was trying to sabotage this for a few days anyways. They changed from a non-nuclear weapon mandate to a non-nuclear enrichment mandate, and that's much bigger because you need to enrich nuclear weapons for a nuclear energy program, which Iran has. They benefit from that. It's cheap energy, and it's used in some medicinal purposes. So once that happened, it just completely kind of, destroyed any hopes.
President Trump agreed with me. He did that. And then I urged him to end the oil waivers and to sanction the hell out of the country. And it ended up crippling their economy. So Iran at the time was selling 2 million barrels of oil a day. 1 million barrels of oil a day. When President Trump ended the oil waivers, it cut their sales to 300,000 barrels a day. At the end of the Trump term, the Iranian economy was in shambles. They had massive inflation. I think the regime was teetering. I think it might have fallen. I would use economic sanctions and I would use moral suasion to try to effectuate regime change.
Okay, so you topple the regime and by whatever means, what happens then? How many people live in Iran, by the way?
I don't know the population.
At all?
No, I don't know the population.
You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple?
How many people live in Iran?
92 million.
Okay. Yeah.
How could you not know that?
I don't sit around memorizing population tables.
Well, it's kind of relevant because you're calling for the overthrow of the government.
Why is it relevant whether it's,
because
it's 90 million or 80 million or 100 million? Why is that relevant?
Because if you don't know anything about the country...
I didn't say I don't know anything about
Okay, what's the ethnic mix of Iran?
They are Persians and
What
predominantly Shia. Okay, this is cute.
It's not
okay.
even... You don't know anything about Iran. So
okay,
actually
I am not
country...
the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran.
You're a senator who's calling for the overthrow of the government.
You're the one who
don't know anything about the country.
No, you don't know anything about the country. You're the one who claims they're not trying to murder Donald Trump. You're the
I'm
one
not saying that.
Who can't figure out if it was a good idea to kill General Soleimani, and you said it was bad.
You don't believe they're trying to murder Trump.
Yes, I do.
Because you're not calling for military strikes against them in retaliation. And if you really believe that...
We're carrying out military strikes today.
You said Israel was.
Right, with our help. I said we. Israel is leading them, but we're supporting them.
Well, you're breaking news here because the U.S. government last night denied, the National Security Council spokesman Alex Pfeiffer denied on behalf of Trump that we were acting on Israel's behalf in any offensive capacity.
No, we're not bombing them. Israel's bombing them.
You just said we were.
He did say that, and Tucker brings up a really good point because if Ted Cruz was truly convinced that Iran was plotting to assassinate Trump, with the inner plans exposed and the intelligence shows this definitively and clearly, there's no way that a neocon like him would not want to go full bore U.S.-led regime change operation, bring in all the weaponry, bring in all the technology, all the intelligence, topple that regime tomorrow. Tucker's right about that. I think it's pure propaganda, and it's a shame to see some of the leading America First people tout it out as if that's gospel. They've never shown any proof of it.
We are supporting
This is
Israel.
high stakes. You're a senator. If you're saying the United States government is at war with Iran right now, people are listening.
Okay, we are not bombing them.
Oh, okay.
Israel is bombing them. And hey, why do you do the snide? Oh, okay.
What do you mean? Because this is super high stakes stuff. This is a huge country that borders a lot of other important countries. A lot of the world's energy comes from there.
So let me
you
ask
don't
you,
want
Tucker,
another disaster. You don't want to be
Tucker,
reckless.
the Ayatollah refers to Israel as the little Satan and America as the great Satan. Do you believe him when he says it's the great Satan?
Of course I believe him.
Do you think if the Ayatollah could murder both of us right now that he would? I do. I believe him.
Okay.
This is just some kind of right-wing woke mentality to say, oh, they're calling us names. They're chanting death to America, but they're not attacking America. They've not gone to war with their neighbors either, like Israel has, by the way, on the bankroll of the U.S. They're not doing genocide in Gaza right now. They're not, attacking several times in the last few decades Lebanon. They're not doing that. If there's people on the streets chanting death to America, what does that do? It does literally nothing. We're safe in our homes here in the U.S. despite the barbarism of our government and the empire it's trying to build. But it doesn't matter what they call us. I would probably do the same if my government was like targeted to be toppled for so long, by the way. It doesn't harm me. Words aren't violence.
I assume no good faith on the part of the Ayatollah.
No, not
and
good
if your
faith.
implication
No,
is like,
it's not
I'm
good
pro-Ayatollah or something.
No, it's not good faith. It's that...
Just saying, you're a lawmaker. You're a powerful person in Washington. This is the most powerful country in the world. If you're calling for toppling in government, it's incumbent on you to know something about the country and to think through the consequences of that. And you haven't, and you don't. And I'm saying that's reckless.
I haven't thought... Okay, you engage in reckless rhetoric with no facts. And to be clear,
I'm not calling for the overthrow of a government.
You put out a newsletter attacking Donald Trump and calling him complicit.
Never attacked Donald Trump.
Yes, you have. And by the way,
I campaigned for Donald Trump.
Okay, yes.
And this is after anti-Semitism, this is the last refuge. You're an anti-Semite and you hate Trump.
Okay,
I love Trump.
I will read. You put out a whole newsletter saying Trump has abandoned America first. And here's what Trump...
Oh, I'd agree with him on that if he said that. I don't think Tucker put it in those words, but it sure does seem like Trump is complicit in this scheme to, just sink any negotiations with Iran in favor of this strike.
Said in response, well, considering that I'm the one that developed America first and considering that the term wasn't used until I came along, I think I'm the one who decides that. For those people who say they want peace, you can't have peace if Iran has a nuclear weapon. So for all of those wonderful people who don't want to do anything about Iran having a nuclear weapon, that's not peace. That was directed at you.
Man, you got me. Busted.
No,
And every single word of that was true. And by the way, he won't refute that. He'll just call, Tucker Carlson a turncoat. That's what they do. I'm just going to predict it. I haven't seen this clip. But I'm going to predict that's what he's going to say. He's not going to refute it. He's not going to show how, no, Trump had no idea that this was going to happen. Netanyahu underhandedly did the strike without his knowledge whatsoever. But even Trump, I believe, has kind of tacitly admitting that he had knowledge of it. He's certainly celebrated of it. And if he didn't, it's almost worse because then you just allow Israel to undermine your foreign policy goals and aspirations for normalized relations with Iran and a possible new JCPOA. This is crazy. He's not going to refute this.
Just saying.
Look, my views. Look, I like Trump. I campaigned for Trump. I know Trump. I talked to him last night. I'm not against Trump, and you know that.
But you're against his foreign policy.
I think that we should be very careful about entering into more foreign wars that don't help us when our country is dying.
When you say
and our
don't
country
help
is dying.
Look, yes, focus on our country. I'm all for it. But the naivete.
You don't even know how much money this costs.
Hey.
You don't know anything about the country whose government you want to overthrow, and you're calling me reckless.
I want to stop a lunatic who wants to murder us from getting nuclear weapons that could kill millions of Americans.
Fair.
You say, I can't see how that benefits America in any way. That is bizarre. And by the way,
bizarre.
Isolationism, your foreign policy is the foreign policy of Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama.
Oh, absolutely.
And it doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm a big leftist.
Yeah, he wants to send disastrous helicopter expeditions into Iran to try to save hostages. Yeah, this is just so ridiculous. This exchange is so dumb. And I'm actually surprised to the extent that Tucker Carlson hasn't brought up the fact that the Iranian nuclear weapon deal is total propaganda. I actually would have thought he would have brought that up, but otherwise I think he's been doing a pretty good job refuting this. He's much more charitable toward Trump than I am, that's for sure. He still seems to respect the man. I don't, but clearly Tucker's in the right on this. America first means not getting embroiled in these affairs. Trump himself just, completely destroyed both Obama and Biden at various times. Biden last year when he executed some targeted strikes on Iran and for their antagonism toward Iran. So
this is so silly. I'm Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama. Okay. Let me just say one last thing.
So how is your foreign policy different from Jimmy Carter's? Seriously.
Please.
But I asked that question seriously.
I don't even know what you're talking about. Jimmy Carter?
So
what century is this? I am the product of the last 25 years, watching carefully, being involved in the periphery, and I see an unending string of foreign policy disasters that have impoverished and hurt our country.
Unending string.
Unending string. They would include Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and our inability to stop the Houthis, by the way, in Yemen, which exposes us as weak, and I grieve over that. So these are failures. You helped preside over some of them.
Yeah, no doubt. And if I was in Tucker's seat, I would just announce that the Carter Doctrine was completely bogus. And what that was it's a mentality that when the U.S. stationed forces in the Persian Gulf, if any of those forces would be attacked by any world power, that would be considered an act of war, even if it's in, a quasi-hostile territory like Saudi Arabia, that just being attacked was enough to declare war. Now, that's pretty bogus, and that's really kind of what's led to much of the military presence in the region is like this mandate that Carter had. But just getting off of that and not delving too deeply into it, Tucker Carlson's exactly right here. Ted Cruz is a lunatic. If you want regime change, what in the world makes you think that this one will go better than all the horrendous ones that we've experienced, even in my lifetime? I'm only 41 years old. I'm almost 42. But Afghanistan, that was a 20-year war where we spent billions of dollars over 20 years, I think 4 presidents in that time, to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. I think that cost, just senseless amounts of lives. Iraq, another 20-year occupation, about 1 million Iraqis died over a farcical CIA regime change propaganda campaign. Syria, Assad, as treacherous as he may have been, he actually protected religious minorities, and now they're executing and hunting down Christians there. We have Libya, open market slave trading is the name of the day there. None of these ones ends up better than they were before. It's happened time and time again. I want no part of it. That's America last. Israel has always wanted to topple not Netanyahu, obviously, but Iran. They've always wanted regime change in Iran. From the jump, we know the U.S. had planned to do that several times before. Just look at the lessons of history. Coupping the government of Iran was a horrible idea. Ted Cruz essentially wants that. He's not exactly calling for a military cleansing of that government, but he wants to do things that have led to disastrous consequences in other realms. Arming rebels, using sanctions. Sanctions is just so stupid that just hurts the common person, and it gives the regime in power a reason to blame all the economic troubles that transpire due to it on that enemy power. It empowers some of these regimes when you sanction them to death. That's why sanctions haven't worked against Russia either. Do you think that Putin's going to withdraw from the Donbass now because of U.S. sanctions? It's so stupid and criminal, and all these neocons like Cruz just never stop and think about that because they're too controlled by the Israel lobby. But I do want to hear what you guys have to say about it. Let me know in the comments below who is right here, Ted Cruz or Tucker Carlson. Do you think regime change operation is the goal? And please like this video, subscribe to the channel, consider supporting me as a YouTube member or a Patreon patron. I'd really appreciate the support. It would help me a lot. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.